What's up, guys? As you can see here, I kind of have a Xbox 360 controller that's open. Excuse me, kind of sick, so I might cough once in a while. But the reason why I took it apart was actually because the chat function, the plug, I think, had a bad connection and it stopped working. Although eventually I figured out it was actually the 2.5mm plug on the headset end, not the controller end. But since I had already voided the warranty opening up the controller, it's not I figured, might as well see what else I could do. And I saw a video for a company which, I won't name. There are several companies out there that mod controllers for Xbox 360s and PS3s. And normally I'm not really a huge fan of that stuff. I had the Onza and I did kind of like having the adjustable shoulder buttons, but I'm not exactly a huge fan of rapid fire controllers or anything. I mean, I feel like as a gamer, my trigger fingers are actually already pretty quick and I don't really need a rapid fire function. But I actually found that the controller was really dirty. I don't know if you can tell. I mean, I kind of cleaned it up a little, but especially along the joystick domes, a lot of dust accumulated in there. And I figured that since I didn't normally have the vibration function turned on, I might as well just take out the motors and lighten up the controller a bit. And for those of you who are actually wondering, how the vibration function works is it's basically two motors, like so, with power connectors on there. And the vibration basically comes from having these weights at the end of the motor shaft that spin, and because of that you have directional forces and directional momentum that kind of moves the entire motor. It gets clamped onto the controller housing around where these, I guess, neoprene pads are. That's what vibrates the controller. But on one of those company sites, I saw a function that they had, which I found quite intriguing. It was adjustable hair triggers, where basically what it was, normally you have your triggers and you push them down a certain amount before they actuate. These are analog triggers where, they are touch sensitive, where you push it further down, they do different things. If you used your controller as the DVD remote, you'll notice that, or even in Black Ops Theater mode, when you pushed it down more, it would speed up or reverse faster than if you pushed it down less. And I was looking at, the site and the pictures. Obviously the website doesn't tell you how they do it, but they do show pictures of it. And what it was basically a set screw that was drilled into the housing of the controller next to where the triggers are. Basically, if I take the back part of the housing, it would be drilled around here and here. And their claim was you could take I believe the hex key, and you could screw the screw down or up depending on how sensitive you want your controller to be. And I've seen on eBay, people have sold adjustable trigger kits where they supply different springs, and I feel like that's not really, it's not really doing what they claim to do. When you adjust the spring, if you see the back of the controller, underneath the triggers, probably can't see it because it's quite dark, but there are springs there, and that controls how much pressure is required to push the trigger down, as well as how fast the trigger springs back up. And that was one of the biggest complaints I had about the Onza, was that I felt that spring was really weak, and you couldn't really fire as quickly with a quick trigger finger, just because the spring wouldn't spring the trigger back up fast enough and reset it back into its original position. But I wasn't about to open up the Onza since, I read there were problems and I didn't want to void the warranty on that. Whereas with the Microsoft controller, it's not a big deal. I haven't really had many issues with it, so even though I voided the warranty, I don't really expect to send it back to Microsoft. But looking at the website anyway, going back to those kits, they say, it requires less pressure to push the trigger, which is true, but I don't think it has the same effect as what they think it is. These springs aren't very strong unless you have some sort of muscle issues with your fingers or some kind of disability, you should have no problems pressing these triggers. I find that normally I would actually prefer a stronger trigger just for it to spring back into position faster, and that allows you to more rapid trigger finger. Whereas the soft spring doesn't spring back as fast, so no matter how fast you push it, you are limited to how fast these triggers spring back up. What they're doing is kind of what they want to do is kind of what I think this company, this modded controller company, is doing, which is adjusting the hair trigger. So basically what that means is, let's say a game requires you to push the trigger down halfway before the gun fires, like let's say you're playing Call of Duty. Well, in this case, all they're doing with those controllers, I believe, is just mechanical. There's nothing electrical about it. And from where the set screw is placed, I think what they're doing is the set screw is actually pushing on this piece of the trigger. It's a small piece of plastic that kind of hooks onto the bracket of the trigger. If I take a pen here, you can see that when I push... excuse the break, guys. I didn't realize that my SD card was running so low on memory. Plus, I didn't really expect the video to be so long-winded. But anyway, as I was saying, when you push up against this black piece, you know, it actually pushes this trigger entirely back. And what I think the company is doing is, when they adjust that set screw and they screw it down more, it already kind of pushes this trigger down a certain amount, so that, you know, this switch goes to a lever and this lever goes here, and this is what controls how hard, I suppose, how far in you've pushed the trigger. So at least my plan with this whole modification is that I'm gonna drill a hole in the back of the casing, right next to where this black piece of plastic is. I'm also gonna put in a small screw. You know, I think I have some 432 screws at work that, you know, I could grab one and use that. And what'll happen is, you know, basically the directions they have for setting their adjustable triggers is you screw the screw all the way down so that whatever function you want it to do in your game happens. So, you know, let's say I just screw it all the way down, and what that set screw will do is it'll slowly push this trigger down a little at a time. You know, it's almost like gear ratios, where if you have this push down, let's say, like you push this down a millimeter, that translates to much more than a millimeter displacement in this entire lever system. And so what I'll do is I'll have that mechanical set screw in, and I'll slowly screw it down. As it pushes this, it'll eventually get to the point where I've actuated this trigger enough for, let's say, the gun to fire in the game, and then you just back it off a little bit so that the action no longer occurs. So basically, once you touch this trigger, it fires the gun. And that's the plan anyway. I don't really think it'll be that useful for the left trigger. I'm probably just gonna do it on the right side trigger, just because that'll help with responsiveness of how fast you fire your gun. It's only a split second really, but you know, in a game like that, you know, split seconds count. Another thing I actually plan on doing is trying to get an outside button, a third button, kind of like the remappable shoulder buttons on the Onza, except these won't be remappable since it'll be, you know, a direct bypass for the button. You know, from what I've seen on these controllers so far, at least with the four, you know, the A, X, Y, B buttons, they're active low buttons. So what happens is the controller constantly has power. I'm not really sure how much voltage is applied to there. And what happens is, when you push down on the button, you're pushing down this black contact here that contacts the two halves of these switches. One side is your, let's say, we'll assume high, or, you know, 5 volts. You know, at least, you know, when I work in electronics, high is 5 volts, and the other side is actually connected to ground. I believe I took a meter, I did it really quick. I believe these bottom 3 and this top 1 are ground points, and then these 3 top points and this bottom half are your high. And when you push down on the button, it makes contact with both halves, and it basically shorts your high signal to ground, which pulls your signal down, and that's what tells the controller that you want to push that button. So, you know, ground is pretty obvious. It's pretty easy to find. You get it from here. You know, there are several points on this controller that are ground. Like this point right here, this solder blob, that's a ground. The only difficult part is actually finding the signal trace for the buttons themselves. You can see here that what I really mainly want to do is just get a quick button maybe on the underside of control for knifing. Since I've switched to tactical button mapping, pushing down on the right joystick now is my crouch or lay prone button. So if I have to knife, I have to use the B button, which, you know, that's quite a distance for your thumb to move. You know, most of the time you are on this joystick, and to go and push back on that button is quite difficult. So I believe I can get it from this point here. There's probably no way you're gonna see it, but without a schematic, it's kind of a pain to have to kind of trace through the entire board and find what points go where. But in some cases, at least luckily for me, the B button, you can physically see a line, a trace there that goes to this point here. And I'm not sure if, you know, the very back of where these buttons are, the whole trigger assembly is, the trigger assembly is there, and I really don't feel like taking that apart. So I'm going to see if I could trace another point from this point here, or at least from this button to anywhere else on the board, where I can just basically install a push button switch. Where I push it down, it basically does the same thing as the B button, and the goal is, you know, I could drill a hole in the back of this plate, and I have my, let's say, my middle finger over that button, and if I want a knife, I just push the button really quickly. You know, just something to do for fun. I'm more interested in that adjustable hair trigger. I think it's actually a really neat idea. They also do trigger stops where it prevents your trigger from going all the way down. For gaming, you know, that means if you limit your movement to rapid fire, especially if you have the hairpin trigger, you don't have to push all the way down to fire most of the time. Most of the time it's halfway. So let's say you put a physical stop there to prevent your trigger from going all the way down. You know that once you've hit that point, you can release and then fire again. Whereas with here, if you're not really sure where the point is, or you're not really used to the game, you know, certain games have different points, then you'll have to push all the way down and then release before firing again. Anyway, this was just supposed to be a quick video on my thoughts on what I was going to do with modifying this controller. It's a spare controller I have. Most of the time I play solo. I have a total of 3. I ended up buying up another Onza, and I also have 2 wireless controllers, and so this is a spare. If I screw it up, it's not a huge deal. I mean, it is kind of a waste of $40, $50, whatever the cost was. But, you know, at least with the hairpin trigger, it shouldn't really damage the controller. It'll just damage the housing, which is just cosmetics. I am more worried about what I'm gonna do with the spare B button, because that will be going and kind of messing with the electronics, and I don't want to accidentally short something and destroy the controller. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed this video. When I start getting some stuff done, I'll put up an update video letting you know what I did exactly and how well it worked out. Thanks for watching, guys.